Hey everyone, how's it going? This is M.L.S. Weech, and welcome to another weekly episode where we look at some book covers, talk about why they're great, talk about a few things that might make them even better, and then let you vote for your favorites down below. Speaking of down below, would you please be so kind as to give me a like, a subscribe, maybe a share, and if you're really feeling generous, maybe check my author link down below and look at my books and see if any of them interest you. I am indeed a self-published author. Paranormal science fiction and fantasy. And that is why the majority of the book covers we're looking at fall into those genres. Basically, what happens is I just kind of scroll through Amazon and pick my favorites, and or the ones that stand out to me as I scroll through the new releases. And that kind of gives me a neighborhood of books to look around and keeps the covers recently published, if not new. So let's start by looking at the final winner for the August book cover of the week. And that winner is The Fire People. And I'm going to try very hard to pronounce this person's name right. The Fire People by Harsharmaveth Bika. I certainly hope I pronounced that right. And if I didn't, I apologize. It's still a beautiful cover. It still uses a lot of very cool techniques, which you can look at in last week's episode. This week, what we're discussing is the beginning of the month of September. So if you like this cover, there's a link down below. There are a lot of things down below, aren't there? There's a link down below that combines the 4 winners for August, and you get to pick your favorite. And when we're done picking 4 book covers for September, we'll have a champion of champions match there as well. That's just kind of how things work along these particular contests. So that means we're ready to start talking about the first set of book covers for September. And the first one we're going to talk about is Reclaimed by Madeline Rowe. I do believe it's pronounced Rowe, might be Raux, but I think it's a French name. And if I did mispronounce it, please go ahead and correct me in the comments. Guess where? Down below. Everything's down below. I love the use of color. In photography, this is similar to a technique called high key lighting. What people tend to do with that technique is they expose for a color that isn't gray. Most cameras, when you're exposing, they're trying to get neutral gray or 18% gray. In these book covers, what's happening is, or in this technique, you actually want to let the white purposefully get overexposed or even extremely overexposed when you lose detail. So when you do this as a photographer, the color of the eye really, really pops, and the whites all around it kind of create this dreamy aspect that makes that color all that much more stronger. And that's what technique is being used here. And typically when they do this, though, when a photographer does it, you're looking at green eyes, blue eyes. With these hazel, maybe brown eyes, it does some interesting things. All of it brings the eye straight to that letter A. The font's a little hard for me to read personally. I wonder what you guys think. I like the technique. I like how the A is right in the iris of the eye. So most of the action is going on there. And while it is dead center, which isn't typically where you want your focal point, because everything revolves around it, you're creating this thing called balance. So if you just have something randomly in the middle of the frame and they got all these other things going on and they're not leading you to the middle of the frame, what you have is a bad image. If you have something in the dead center of the frame and all the other elements are leading you to the middle of the frame, then you have this technique called formal balance. And that's what this cover does. So great work from Madeline Rowe, beautiful cover. And if you like it, you can vote for it in the link down below. There should be a song like that one of these days. I'll generate a song called Down Below. The next book cover we're going to talk about is by Laurel K. Hamilton, Laurel K. Hamilton, and it is A Terrible Fall of Angels. So this technique actually uses silhouette, but it uses silhouette in the form of shadow. Anime does this a lot. I remember a photo of a drawing of Naruto I really liked, where Naruto and Sasuke were walking in opposite directions, and their shadows were crisscrossing each other, and they were holding knives to each other's throat. This kind of harkens back to that same kind of technique. And what's happening is you see this figure, and then the shadow of the figure is a depicted angel, or at least a human with angel-like wings, whatever you want to call it. I'd say the most famous use of this technique in more or less recent times was the promotional poster for the Phantom Menace, when little Anakin was running to his house and the shadow was Vader. It is a pun, but it is literal foreshadowing. So if it's a little groan worthy to you, I can completely understand it, but it's still an effective visual technique, even if it's a literal cliche. So good job on that. The next cover we're going to talk about, I want to apologize before I bring it up. I'm left with the resolution that Amazon provides. So the resolution of this image isn't my favorite, but I don't want you to let that take away from what the image is doing. I have to increase these so I can see them and talk about them. And when I don't have what they call the raw file or a higher resolution file, it looks a little pixelated, but the cover isn't this ugly. The version of the cover I had access to is a low resolution, and they are not the same things. And I ask you not to hold it against it, because what this cover does is awesome. The composition of this cover is just fantastic. It has framing in that we have this little cave with the goblin down below, and all of these other figures. It has depth in that you're using size or scale, if you want to call that, to create a sense of depth, where you have a larger goblin in the front, and then they get smaller and smaller as they go to the background, so that shows a little bit of depth. It has use of what's called the rule of thirds, where you have the princess in the upper left kind of corner, not the corner, but in the upper left zone of the book, and that creates a point of reference. And then there's more scaling going on with the mountain range and the river leading back to the castle in the background. It has a great use of color. So I can understand if this isn't your favorite cover. I don't know if it's my favorite cover. I haven't really looked at them to pick my favorite. But the thing I need you to understand is this cover does everything it does perfectly. Resolution aside, that's not the designer's fault. That's my fault for the access I have, and I'm not George McDonald, so I don't have the original photo to work with. But what it even has silhouetting, because this is either black or yellow. So just one technique after another, and all of them building together. But why this is so impressive is, normally I would caution people to use a few techniques sparingly to create a simple theme. That is what most people do. If one of my students came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Leistow or Mr. Weech," Leistow is my real human name. Weech is just easier to pronounce. Mr. Weech, I'm going to use layering and framing and rule of thirds and color and scale. I'm like, no, you're not. Don't use all this. That's gonna be the busiest poster in the world, or the busiest picture in the world. And I'm like, no, it'll work. I would never believe. And this cover shows that you can indeed use many design techniques and still ultimately only have 3 visual aspects. You got the castle, the princess, the goblins, and then if you want to add the 4th with the title, the text, then it's simplistic, even though it's using just a ridiculous number of techniques to have what's overall a very awesome cover. So it might not be my favorite, but it might be the best designed cover in the set we're looking at today. And I really think any future designers should look at this concept and put it in whatever inspirational folder they have when I'm doing design work, or when I'm looking for people to design the covers for my books. I take a lot of these that I find and I go, hey, I like this technique, or I like this, or I like doing this. I like having examples of ideas I'm going for. and then building on those examples to see how to make them better. And I think this is something designers should absolutely study. So big ups to George MacDonald and The Princess and the Goblin. The next cover we're going to talk about, now that I'm finished raving about that particular guy, is a more commonly seen type of cover. This is a surplus of Sirens by Amanda Craiglow. And I'm going to bring it up for you guys to see while I talk about it. So in its essence, this is just another portrait cover. You're going to see, if you go to Amazon and you look for fantasy, especially if you look for paranormal, and super likely, if you're doing paranormal romance, you're going to take a relatively attractive woman, put her on an interesting background, and call it a day. Maybe a little bit of fire, maybe a little bit of whatever. So for me, this kind of cover is getting a little old. Even though I used it on the cover to my last book, it's hard to get away from. It's a very powerful tool to take your main character, put the picture of the main character on there, and let the readers and audiences connect to that main character. So I can't knock it, even if my brain is starting to cry out for just any kind of different representation. But at the end of the day, this one's unique, one, because we're in a water setting. Usually when I see people using the trident, I think the trident looks goofy. So I like this cover because the trident doesn't look like ridiculously small or unnaturally long. And that actually is one of the things that drew me to it. I was like, oh, that trident looks like, that human should be holding that trident, or that creature, whatever. Clearly she's hanging out underwater and not drowning. So something's going on. The Kraken, octopus, there's another one. Whatever kind of creature you're looking at back there is easy enough to see and make out without being distracting. And the detail in the hair as it's floating in the water is very well done. So not the most original concept this side of fantasy, but certainly a good example of how to execute that concept. So here we go with a very interesting cover. It's Fangs of the Black Tiger by J.F. Lee. And this cover reminds me a little bit about She Who Became the Sun, which won one of the August book covers and is something you can vote for in the August book cover of the month. It's not as stunning as that book cover, but there are a lot of similarities between it. Most obviously, it's the yellow-orange. She Who Became the Sun was a much brighter yellow, but it's the same thing. You have this mono high power color in the background. And this cover is way more about the figure than that cover. So in terms of comparison, there are some distinctions. They emphasize the text a lot more. I love how they position the figure around the text and how they move the text so that they can accomplish that feat. It is very simplistic. I just love swordplay. I think Weech is one of my favorite anime because of the emphasis on the zanpakuto and that each sword had an identity and unique aspects. What was the other one I was thinking about? The Stormlight Archive and what swords are like there and how they're kind of related. And if you haven't read the Stormlight Archive, I don't want to spoil that for you, but you should check that out. All that being said, these are simplistic uses of design concepts. So for me, the effect is a little more stunning than The Princess and the Goblin, even if it's less impressive in how it used those design techniques, which is why everything's subjective. Fewer techniques to create a more simplistic effect is typically the way I would encourage anyone new to this to go. So this uses color and contrast to draw the eye in and hold the eye there. And it is a very powerful tool. And it really screams of anime and comic book art when it adds these elements. So it's a great cover. And I'm glad that I was able to find it. The next book we're going to look at is Arrival by Jasper T. Scott. We have another silhouette happening down there. And I want to highlight the good and the bad of this silhouette. The good of the silhouette is you can see the figures. You can see the that this is a family holding hands. And you can see their hands connecting and grasping one another. And that is why this works, because you can see that happening. But then if you look where their feet and legs should be, people with better color vision than I have can probably see their legs and their feet. But when you overlap black on black, things can tend to get lost. The designer didn't really have a choice, though. What I appreciate about this is the designer probably knew that that was going to happen and let that go, because the designer needed to see the spaceship in the upper half of the frame. They needed the title text. They needed to be looking down on the landscape of the city. So sometimes when you're designing, you have to break a rule, even if it's a rule that degrades one aspect of your book, to allow a more important part of the book to shine. That is a hard thing for artists to do. And the artist who can let one mistake go, or acknowledge they have to make this design mistake to accomplish this other design goal, that is when you're making more professional decisions with your art. And I think that this designer should be highlighted, should be appreciated for making those kinds of decisions. I wish I could have been a fly in the wall when maybe the author or the publishing company is like, well, what we really need is this high view, this family silhouetted. And the artists are like, yeah, but if I have a high view, it's going to be a black background, and then you won't be able to see half the people. And if you look, like literally half of these, the figure on the left and the third from the left, like almost half of them disappear into the ground, when that's not really what's happening. But the rest of the effect, the cityscape, the burning landscape below them, shines because of that. So it's just really, really a really good opportunity to talk about breaking rules for reasons. I have a lot of students who are like, well, I wanted to break this rule. I'm like, well, I mean, you're allowed to do whatever you want, but there has to be purpose, and it doesn't mean you didn't break a rule, and it doesn't mean that there aren't visual consequences for those rules. What happens is you acknowledge that you're doing one thing wrong, and you have to be okay with it, and okay that people are going to notice it. There are people who hate silhouettes in and of themselves. So the last book that we're going to talk about is kind of a cheat for me. I'm not actually the biggest fan of this cover, but I'm a huge fan of Peter B. Brett and his work. So there's no way I'm not going to put this cover up there. That doesn't mean the cover's not good. It's just not nearly as good as other covers from this author. And you know, I'm excited to get to it when I can claw through the other 10 books on my TBR pile. It would help if I stopped reading manga. That's really impacting my my reading time. Anyway, when you're looking at this cover, it's simplistic framing with a very unique art style. I can appreciate and acknowledge the unique art style that we're looking at, even if it's not something I, as a person, it's not my flavor of ice cream. You know, if Rocky Road is the greatest thing in the universe to you, I don't begrudge you that. But whenever you go with a unique artistic style, there is a risk that some viewers won't like it because it's non-traditional. But you can't be original if you don't try for these things. So the detail is still fantastic. The art around the image is like, I like looking at each little design. And those are very good things. I'm just not the title text makes a kind of sense, but it's a little hard to read in that muted background on top of the figure. The author text is a different cover that holds the eye. It's a more powerful cover. And look, if you put Peter B. Brett on any cover, someone's going to stop and grab it because the guy is awesome. But it detracts in this case from the art that is available for the viewer to see. Now, if you love it, vote for it down below. I'm not gonna have any problem with that whatsoever. But really all it has going for it in the design sense is its use of framing and its use of detail. But it's more about the author and the symbology around the frame than it is about the character. And most of the things I appreciate in covers is when they either emphasize the character or the theme. And when a book cover becomes more about the author's name or design technique, it kind of brings it down, in my opinion. Obviously, design technique is outstanding, but when it looks like they maybe lost sight of communicating what the book was about for the sake of showing what the designer can do, it rubs me the wrong way. It's still a good cover, don't get me wrong. You have to talk about the good and the bad, but this is something I would caution independent authors and designers for independent authors. I would not use these techniques because this only works because the following that this author has and the momentum that this author has will supersede any number of design issues, because I can't wait to read this, and really it could have just been like the author scribbling on the manuscript, and I would have been like eagerly waiting for someone to hand it to me. But you have to be more conscientious if your name is lesser known, and that's the thing that I had to make sure that I emphasized. So those are the 7 covers. Feel free to tell me which your favorite is in the comments down below. Please make sure to vote. And there are 2 things to vote for this week. You got the August book cover of the month. These 4 covers worked very hard to get into this poll. Don't leave them out and not vote for them, so they don't win the actual book cover of the month award. And then there is the next poll, which is these covers for the first week of September. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for being with me. Please remember once more to click like and subscribe, and I wish you a great week. God be with you. Bye.